What if peace was not a dream, but a choice?
The year was 2035, and the Earth stood trembling at a crossroads it had long ignored. For decades, leaders had promised that international cooperation and technology would bring lasting peace. But instead, the world had fractured further with every passing year. The United Nations, once seen as a beacon of collective hope, had weakened into little more than a ceremonial stage for speeches and power struggles. Civil wars in Africa, famine in Gaza, and political deadlock in the Middle East were constant reminders that humanity had failed to uphold the promise of never again. Refugees numbered in the millions, children starved while aid trucks were blocked, and every new conflict added another scar to a planet already bleeding. Across the United States, the public watched in growing fear and cynicism. They no longer trusted in governments or international institutions, only in the uneasy sense that humanity's fragile order was slipping toward something catastrophic. At the heart of this unease stood New York City, the proud home of the UN headquarters. Once called the capital of the world, it had been a symbol of hope after the devastation of World War II. Now, it had become a monument to broken ideals. The building's tall glass facade still gleamed under the sun, but inside, the General Assembly chamber echoed with hollow debates and empty resolutions that carried no real power. On the streets surrounding it, protesters held signs demanding action for Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and dozens of forgotten crises. Tourists who once visited the building with admiration now whispered with disappointment. Even ordinary New Yorkers had grown indifferent, dismissing the UN as irrelevant while they hurried through their daily lives. To them, the skyscrapers, subways, and neon billboards of Manhattan had more weight than an institution that seemed powerless against the world's chaos. Among the millions who moved through New York each day was Eva Roy, a woman who carried a complicated relationship with the UN. 10 years earlier, in her 20s, she had joined humanitarian missions in conflict zones. She remembered standing in dusty camps in the Middle East, handing out water bottles to children who hadn't drunk clean water in weeks. She remembered rebuilding makeshift schools in Africa, where little girls learned to write their names with broken chalk. She had once believed the UN was humanity's greatest achievement, a place where compassion could cross borders and war could be stopped with unity. But as she grew older, she saw the truth. She saw Security Council meetings collapse into arguments. She saw resolutions vetoed while bombs kept falling. She saw leaders put their national interests above human lives. Those experiences hardened her. Now, at 35, she worked as a librarian, burying herself in books, hiding from a world she no longer believed she could change. Still, Eva couldn't escape her old hopes entirely. Most evenings, she walked to the edge of the Hudson River, where the water reflected the city lights in broken waves. From there, she had a clear view of the UN headquarters. She often sat on a bench staring at the glowing building, wondering if history would remember the United Nations as a failed experiment, or as the last line humanity ever drew before destroying itself. Sometimes she imagined what the world could have been if leaders had truly chosen cooperation. Sometimes she imagined a version of herself that never gave up, that still believed she could make a difference. It was on one such evening, as she sat lost in thought, that something extraordinary occurred. Something that would blur the line between reality and imagination forever. The night sky above New York was usually gray and dull, smothered by pollution and the glow of the city's lights. But this time, a shimmering wave rippled across the heavens like a curtain being drawn aside. People stopped mid-step, cars honked to a halt. Pedestrians lifted their phones, capturing the strange phenomenon. At first, it looked like an aurora borealis, though no one had ever seen one stretch this far south. The colors, green, blue, violet, wove together, pulsing as though alive. Then slowly the waves converged, gathering directly above the UN headquarters. The air vibrated with a low hum, and suddenly the lights solidified into a massive, glowing ring in the sky. It wasn't random. It was precise, perfect, like a doorway cut into the fabric of reality itself. Fear swept through the city. Some people screamed, thinking it was an attack from a rival nation wielding new technology. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers, convinced they were witnessing a divine sign. News outlets scrambled, their helicopters circling the sky, broadcasting the spectacle live across the world. The United States military put jets in the air, but none dared approach the phenomenon. And there, amid the chaos, Eva stood frozen on her bench, her eyes locked on the shining portal above the UN. Unlike those around her, she didn't feel fear. She felt recognition. Something inside her whispered that this wasn't an attack, nor a miracle, it was an invitation. Her heart pounded, but her legs carried her forward anyway. She pushed through the crowd that had gathered outside the UN building, ignoring the shouted warnings of police officers and the panicked cries of onlookers. The air grew warmer as she drew closer, buzzing with an energy that made her skin tingle. Suddenly, a beam of light shot down from the glowing ring, striking the plaza directly in front of the UN headquarters. It looked like a pillar of liquid starlight, swirling with impossible colors. People shrieked and backed away, but Eva felt herself pulled toward it. Before she could think, before she could hesitate, the light engulfed her completely and lifted her off the ground. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the New York she knew. The air smelled cleaner, fresher, as if the city had been reborn. The skyline stretched above her, but something was different. The skyscrapers shone with lights powered by clean energy. Roads were filled not with honking traffic, but with silent, gliding vehicles that left no exhaust. And everywhere she looked, people moved calmly and peacefully, without the tension she had always associated with New York. The greatest shock came when her eyes fell on the UN headquarters. It was taller, grander, redesigned with glowing structures of glass and steel. Above it floated a massive holographic emblem of the United Nations, brighter and more powerful than she had ever seen. Eva's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled forward, unable to process what she was seeing. This was New York, yet it wasn't. It was familiar, but impossibly better. Like a dream version of her city. She saw children playing in the streets without fear of crime. She saw public gardens where strangers of every background sat together, sharing food and conversation. There were no angry protests, no signs demanding justice, because justice already seemed to exist here. Eva whispered to herself, "This can't be real." And yet every sensation told her it was. As she stood in awe, a tall woman approached her. She wore a striking blue uniform embroidered, with a silver insignia that looked like the UN, symbol but redesigned, sleeker, surrounded by a ring of stars. The woman's eyes carried both authority and warmth, and she spoke as if she already knew Eva. "Welcome, Eva Roy," she said calmly. "We've been waiting for you." Eva staggered back. "How do you know my name?" "Where am I?" The woman extended her hand with quiet confidence. "My name is Cade. You're standing in the Mirror City." The reflection of what your world could have become. Eva's thoughts raced. Mirror City? Another version of New York? "This isn't possible," she muttered. "The UN in my world is collapsing. People are starving. Wars never end. How can this place even exist?" Sierra's expression softened. "Because choices matter. Your world chose division, fear, and selfish power. Our world chose something different. We chose unity." Her words carried a weight that made Eva's chest tighten. Was this truly an alternate reality, a glimpse of what humanity might have achieved? Sierra guided Eva through the streets, and everywhere she looked, Eva saw reminders of the difference. Towering screens projected images of global councils, where representatives from every nation spoke as one, debating solutions instead of exchanging threats. Instead of military parades, there were celebrations of science, music, and culture. Instead of advertisements selling empty luxuries, holograms promoted education, compassion, and sustainability. It was like walking into a future where humanity had finally grown up. Eva's mind burned with questions. How? How did you make this happen? In my world, nations cling to power like children clutching toys. They would never give it up. Sierra nodded. It was not easy. We faced the same crossroads your world faces now. Climate collapse, endless wars, famine, pandemics. But when survival itself was threatened, our leaders finally listened to the people. They dissolved their armies, their borders, and their greed, and created something greater, a true united Earth. They entered a massive plaza, larger than Times Square, where a breathtaking monument stood. It was a crystal-like spire reaching toward the sky, surrounded by flowing water and lush greenery. "This is the Nexus Core," Sarah explained. It is the heart of our world government. It is both technology and symbol. The core analyzes crises before they grow into disasters. It allocates resources where they are needed most. And above all, it ensures fairness. No child here dies of hunger. No family is abandoned to war. Eva stared, her hands trembling. In her world, artificial intelligence had been weaponized, used for profit and destruction. Here, it had become a guardian of peace. As Eva touched the cool surface of the monument, her vision was suddenly flooded with images. She saw a timeline of this world's history, nations disarming, treaties signed not for advantage but for survival, leaders stepping aside as humanity voted to form a planetary council. She saw scientists working side by side, farmers feeding the hungry, doctors curing disease without worrying about cost. The vision overwhelmed her, tears streaming down her face. It was possible all along, she whispered. We just failed. Sierra placed a hand on her shoulder. Your world hasn't failed yet. That's why you're here. The Nexus doesn't open without purpose. You were chosen because you still believe, even if only a little. You've seen both the suffering and the hope. You carry the question in your heart, what if peace was possible? Eva shook her head. But I'm just one person. I can't change the world. Sierra's eyes shone with conviction. One person carrying truth is more powerful than an army carrying lies. Suddenly, a loud alarm echoed through the plaza. The Nexus core began to flicker, its crystal surface rippling with shadows. Dark images spread across its surface, burning cities, starving children, missiles striking homes. Eva gasped. They were scenes from her own world. What's happening? She asked. Sierra's face hardened. Your world's chaos is bleeding into ours. The fracture between realities is unstable. If the darkness spreads, it could destroy both worlds. The sky above Mirror City darkened as cracks of shadow split through the glowing horizon. People looked up in fear, rushing to safety as the calm order of the city was disturbed. Eva clutched her chest, guilt washing over her. It's my fault. I brought this here. Sierra shook her head. No, Eva, you are not the cause. You are the bridge. The fracture opened because your world is at the tipping point. But you can take back what you've seen here. You can give your world a chance. The ground trembled as the shadows deepened, and Eva saw visions swirling in the sky. In one, the UN in her world collapsed completely, replaced by endless wars. In another, billions starved as climate disasters swept across continents. But then, faintly, she saw a third vision. People rising together, demanding change, forcing leaders to choose unity over division. It was fragile, flickering like a candle, but it was there. Sierra pointed to it. That is the path you must carry home. The path of possibility. Eva's eyes burned with tears. But what if no one listens? What if they call me crazy? Sierra took her hands firmly. Then you keep speaking until they do. Change begins not when the powerful act, but when the powerless refuse to be silent. Tell them what you saw. Show them the world that can exist. Plant the seed, even if you don't live to see it grow. The Nexus core pulsed violently, releasing beams of both light and shadow. The portal reappeared in the sky above, its pull growing stronger. Eva felt her body being tugged upward, back toward her own world. Panic seized her. I don't want to leave. Not yet. Sierra held her gaze with fierce intensity. You must. This is not your home. Your home still needs you. And remember this, Eva, peace is not a dream. It is a decision. The portal's force yanked harder, and Eva's surroundings blurred. The shining buildings of Mirror City melted away, the peaceful faces of its citizens fading into streaks of light. Sierra's final words echoed in her mind. Carry the truth. Show them what you've seen. Believe. And then, with a flash that split her senses apart, Eva was hurled back into darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the cold stone steps outside the UN, headquarters in New York. The night sky was quiet again. The portal was gone. Around her, the crowd was still buzzing. But now the glowing ring had vanished as if it had never been there. People muttered nervously, unsure whether they had witnessed a miracle, a hallucination, or some classified experiment. But Eva knew the truth. She had seen another world. Slowly she stood, her legs shaking. The UN building loomed above her, the same tired monument it had been before. Police officers pushed the crowd back, news cameras flashed, and officials barked orders into radios. Nothing here had changed. And yet everything inside Eva had. She walked away from the crowd, her heart pounding with new determination. The voices of doubt that had haunted her for years were gone. In their place was the vision of children laughing in safe streets, of nations working as one, of a world that had chosen survival over destruction. The memory burned in her like fire, impossible to extinguish. Eva knew it would not be easy. She knew that most people would not believe her. Some would call her delusional, others a liar. Politicians would dismiss her words as fantasy. But she also knew that seeds of truth have a way of spreading, slowly, quietly, until they bloom into something undeniable. She had carried food across deserts once. Now she would carry hope across despair. The next day, Eva returned to her job at the library, but she was no longer the same woman who had shelved books in silence. She began to write her story, not as a tale of science fiction, but as a testimony of what she had witnessed. She shared it with colleagues, with friends, with strangers who came to borrow books. She told them not just of the portal, but of the possibility that humanity could still choose unity if it had the courage. Her words began to spread, whispered first in coffee shops and subway cars, then amplified on social media, carried across borders. Some mocked her, but others listened. Activists took her message to rallies. Students debated it in classrooms, and slowly, the idea grew that perhaps the United Nations could still be reborn, not as a failing institution, but as the foundation of something greater. Eva would never know whether her story alone would be enough to change the course of history, but she understood something vital. Hope is contagious, and once it takes root, it cannot be easily erased. She had been given a vision of what humanity could become, and she refused to let it die. And so, under the familiar yet weary skyline of New York, Eva walked forward with unshakable conviction. The world was broken, yes, but it was not beyond repair. In her heart, she carried the light of the mirror city, a reminder that peace was not an illusion. It was a choice waiting to be made, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could help ignite it.